Well, you know what? I couldn't help myself. I'm so excited. I can't. Well, okay, hang on. Let me play it. Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs and members of the Post-Geek Singularity community. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your Master of Fun and Wonder, your Viceroy of Verisimilitude, your existential Mr. Rogers, your Archbishop of Banterbury, and your Chancellor of Cheerfulness. And let me tell you, anytime I get to break out the Hot Toys 89 Michael Keaton Batmobile, well, I can break it out whenever I want, but sometimes there's reasons to bring up one of the greatest toys, well, any kid could possibly own. I know I'm not a kid, but man, let me tell you, today's news has me excited. Okay, let me just set this down. Hang on. It's actually probably the heaviest toy that I've ever owned. Well, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Post-Geek Singularity, you imagination connoisseurs, since I've been on YouTube, boy, that's heavy. I've got to wipe my brow. It's hot out and it's heavy. Since I've been on YouTube for the last 5 years, one of my catchphrases, one of the things that I say a lot, is how we, as imagination connoisseurs, we live in fantastic times. We are getting so much cool stuff to enjoy across many platforms. Novels, comics, movies, television shows. It's rather incredible if you think about it. Now, a lot of you will say, well, Rob, you rail on about Star Trek. You haven't liked that in 11 years. That's true, because it's terrible. The Star Wars films have been up and down, but we're still getting them. We're getting a fifth Daniel Craig Bond film. Well, one day, but it's coming. We got Doom Patrol Season 2. Who would have thought there'd be a Doom Patrol show? Man, who would have thought we'd have an Umbrella Academy series, of which we're also getting Season 2. Ladies and gentlemen, kind, gentle souls, however you identify, all of you people from across the 28 known galaxies, it's amazing just how exciting the times we live in are. Who would have ever thought we would have ended up getting Avengers Infinity War and Endgame? Who would have thought I'm going to get my beloved Moon Knight TV series finally? I mean, I would have liked a movie, but I'm getting a series. I mean, a movie would be 2 hours, but a series, if they're doing 8 episodes, 8 hours could be 10. Who knows? There's just so much cool stuff and cool news coming out. Now today, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, I told you, June 19th, I went to the world premiere of Tim Burton's Batman in Westwood. The Bruin and the Fox were the two theaters. I was in the Bruin, and I was sitting in Jack Nicholson's row. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. 31 years ago, June 19th, was the actual world premiere. I've tweeted pictures of myself out. It's on my Instagram feed. You know, you can see all that stuff. But today, now, I'm going to be totally excited about this information because why not? Why shouldn't you be? I mean, let it come. Now, I know. Now, my excitement is tempered because I understand, ladies and gentlemen, this excitement is coming out of news about the Flash movie. The Flash movie that's had 187 directors and how many different screenwriters. I mean, this is one of the most longest gestating comic book movies that we've heard about. And all it has had is one big revolving door of talent. One big revolving door of talent. But I'll tell you why today's news gets me more excited than most. Because I think that the Walter Hamada-led team at Warner Brothers right now has a good handle on what they're doing. And why should I say that? Why do I say that? After getting movies that were less than, let's say, desirable. And I understand the Birds of Prey film was made under this current regime. But Aquaman, Wonder Woman 84, Shazam, I think what they're doing at Warner Brothers and what gives me hope, I mean, we're talking like Andy Dufresne, Shawshank Redemption hope. You know what I'm saying? I mean, Morgan Freeman, who had the hope when he found that tin underneath the tree and went to Zewataneo. It's that kind of hope, people. That's the kind of hope I'm feeling about Warner Brothers right now. Because what they're doing is what Kevin Feige did. Remember, Kevin Feige made 13 Marvel movies, worked in a producing capacity on 13 Marvel movies before he started the MCU. He saw what worked, he saw what didn't work, he saw X-Men, he saw Spider-Man, he saw Daredevil, he saw Ghost Rider, he saw Elektra. He saw what worked and what didn't work, and then when he began the MCU with Iron Man back in 2008, he really had a real handle on what they needed to do. And they took their cues from, go figure, the comic books themselves. The Marvel comic universe was the very basis of the MCU. Now, obviously, you can't make movies set in the real world and base them entirely off comic book stories because there's often comic book logic, comic book reality. It doesn't work that way. Well, after Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy, and they wanted to strike up a DC universe taking cues from what they did in Nolan's Batman trilogy. Remember, Nolan was a producer on Man of Steel. One of the things they were doing was laying into something different than what the MCU did, which is they were trying to bring a more realistic vibe to the whole thing, which in a way I think is good. But on the other hand, you're still dealing with comic book material. And one of the things that DC would do, more so than Marvel, is rely on the multiverse. When I was a kid, my favorite thing in life, aside from Star Trek and James Bond movies, and The Twilight Zone and Outer Limits, and probably a lot of other things, but one of my favorite things in life was Justice League of America comics. My mom used to get them for me every month on the spindle rack. That's the kind of mom my mom was. She knew I loved Justice League. But the reason I loved the Justice League was not that I just loved the characters, but I loved the idea of the multiverse. And every year, if you read Justice League comics, they would team up with the Justice Society of America. That was like 30 years. They were Earth 2. They figured out a really interesting way. Flash 2 worlds. You all know the stories. But anyway, so that was really cool. And the multiverse was definitely something that was part of the DC worlds. And in 1985, one of the things I loved was this. That's my hardcover collection of Crisis on Infinite Earths. I mean, I've got the absolute version. I've also got right above it. You might be able to see the Graffiti Designs version. I've got all kinds of different versions of Crisis on Infinite Earths. I loved it. I loved it. And it really began the whole, between that and Secret Wars, the multiverse crossovers or big crossovers that the comic book companies were doing, even still to this day. So, very exciting for me. So now we have a new regime at Warner Brothers that is seemingly starting to take cues from, well, lo and behold, the comic books themselves. Now, they have been talking about one of the more exciting storylines that The Flash was involved in was, of course, Flashpoint. And Flashpoint, there was, for those of you who haven't read it, I don't want to spoil it, there's also the animated film, The Flashpoint Paradox. You can see that. You can read the comics, and they've just released the absolute Flashpoint, which is pretty cool. Which leads me to believe that this Flash movie, despite Ezra Miller's recent travails in Iceland, I mean, who gets in trouble in Iceland? Leave it to Ezra Miller, I guess. I'm a huge fan of Ezra Miller as an actor. I mean, we have to talk about Kevin, the Wallflower movie he was in, The Perks of Being a Wallflower. Guy's a terrific performer. Loved his Flash in Justice League. Loved him. And they seem to be moving ahead with the Flashpoint movie. Now, I'm going to temper all of my excitement by saying, if you look at the history of this Flash movie, I don't know what the problem is. I mean, I would have thought after the supreme goofy awesomeness that was Aquaman, if they can pull Aquaman off with the 7 tribes and Jaimin Hansu being a fish man, I mean, I loved Aquaman. God bless James Wan for embracing the, and I'll admit it, goofiness. It was goofy, but it was goofy the way all things that are awesomely goofy are. I loved every minute of it. I embraced it all. And once I saw that a movie like Aquaman could make $1 billion, it was my hope that the people at DC would look at that and go, you know, rather than compete with the MCU, which is doing their own vibe, you guys can embrace the colorful craziness of your own comic book universe and maybe lay into that a little bit more. It looks like Wonder Woman 84 certainly has a little bit more goofiness. Setting it in 1984 alone, already there's a sense of whimsy I like. We'll see if they pull off the tone. But today, people started sending me things like, Rob, check out this news. And I'm like, come on, man. And I was like, should I believe this news? So what did I do? I went to, there are 3 places I go to see about the validity if entertainment news is real. And if anybody is reporting that of these 3 sources, they are Variety, Hollywood Reporter, and Deadline Online. And Deadline is sort of the go-to industry news. Now, hang on, I want to read this. And lo and behold, I went to Deadline, and kabam, look what popped up. If I can get there. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, look what popped up. Michael Keaton in early talks to reprise Batman role for the DC Universe, starting with The Flash. Now, early talks to reprise Batman role for the DC Universe, starting with The Flash. Because I'll tell you something. If you go to an Academy Award-nominated actor and someone that has as long a career in the entertainment business as Michael Keaton, you're not just going to him to talk about a one-off. Like, come in and do a cameo. You don't do that with someone like Michael Keaton. Well, Robert Redford. No, that's different. Robert Redford, a little older. I mean, it was cool. They were playing on things like 3 Days of the Condor and All the President's Men. It was definitely a great cameo. But this is different. Michael Keaton has shown in his roles over the last couple of years, he is an actor still in his prime, and he is powerful. He is amazing. Batman role for the DC Universe, starting with The Flash. Let's dig into what was actually said. There's Michael Keaton. This comes from Anthony D'Alessandro, who covers a lot of this kind of material for Deadline. Deadline has confirmed that Michael Keaton, who first played the big screen version of Batman in 1989 for Warner Brothers and its 1992 sequel Batman Returns, is in early talks to return to the role once again. Keaton would play Batman in a Nick Fury-like role, starting with Warner Brothers' The Flash, starring Ezra Miller, and could continue to play the Dark Knight in other upcoming DC movies like Batgirl. Reportedly, the Keaton Batman won't impact the mythology being hammered out by Matt Reeves' reboot The Batman, starring Robert Pattinson as the Caped Crusader, and will pick up his storyline after Batman Returns. Andreas Muschietti is directing The Flash from a script by Birds of Prey writer Christina Hodson. Barbara Muschietti and Michael Disco are producing. Keaton, who had already been working with director Tim Burton in Beetlejuice in 1988, was selected by the director and late casting director and Warner Brothers casting boss Marion Doherty for his eyes. One source tells us the deal may not happen, but as of right now, there are talks. So, that was the list. Now, there are talks. Doesn't mean anything. But the fact that Deadline is reporting it, and I will tell you this. Right now, it's the Wild West in terms of these franchise properties. And they have proven, and I think Aquaman, do not underestimate the tone of what Aquaman did for the DCEU. The fact that a movie that was that supremely goofy, but in a delicious way, that it made over $1 billion proves that there's a hunger. And what the studios have finally realized, Kevin Feige already knew this, but what the studios are realizing is there's an entire generation of moviegoers, and even old dudes with one foot in their grave like myself, who, buy 6-scale Batmobiles. And we know what's cool. On one hand, they're trying to make Star Trek and change it for the modern audiences. Not cool. So they haven't had, they're getting new audiences, which is fine. But they're not they're not doing what's really cool. And what's really cool is if you look at the things that Warner Brothers has in their pipeline, that they already have. Like, you have to understand, the way Hollywood works is, especially now, when people are making these kinds of films, you need risk aversion. You have to be risk averse, because if you're going to invest $150 million or $200 million into a film right now, the magic number is, don't listen to anyone else. Listen to the Bobster here. It's $1 billion. The number that they're expecting to make on all of these movies is $1 billion. That's what they want, because when you have movies like Aquaman or Captain Marvel or Joker I mean, Joker made $1 billion off what, a $65 million spend, $80 million spend. If you add marketing, let's even say with all the marketing they spent on it, let's say you bump that up to $150 million. For a studio, normally studio accounting is, well, maybe it's 3 or it could be 4 times what you spend on it. Well, even if it's 4 times what you spent, after $600 million, a movie like Joker is making a profit, a huge profit. So the number for a comic book franchise film is $1 billion. That's the number. And that's what they want to make. It's been proven to come time and time again because right now, and probably for the next decade, we're going to have an entire audience of people like myself who are going to roll out, buy advance tickets, and see these movies over and over again. And I'm at the older end of the spectrum. I mean, all you people watching me today, the average age of the people that watch this show are between 35 and 45. I would assume that all of you, like myself, have another decade of movies in you that are based on comic book properties, as long as they are good. And let me tell you, if they do a Flashpoint film and they bring back Michael Keaton as Batman, and it's done well, which I think it would be because the director, he's quite a very talented director. He's got both Michael Keaton and this director now with It and things like that have a huge relationship with the studio already. So this is an incredible pairing if it happens. If this movie happens, and I think this might be the time it actually does, assuming everybody's gotten over Ezra Miller's travails or whatever. The thing that's really cool about this is it shows that the management at Warner Brothers has now been opened up to the possibilities of what's cool. You know, the problem with the studios is that all of the people that are in charge, Ivy League educated business people mostly, they weren't fans. They don't understand why and how these things are cool and what appeals to an audience. Clearly the people running Star Trek don't. They don't get it at all. They think they do, but they really don't. And if you have a property that has a long-standing mythology or comes from multiple mythologies, as Batman does, what is not understood by a lot of the time the people at the top is how audiences dig this mythology, how they like it. And when you try and explain multiverses and people are like, huh? What? We don't understand that because the marketing people don't understand it. The executives don't get it. They're like, why is this cool? Why is this cool? They really don't. And unless you grew up being a fan or understanding why it's cool, and usually there weren't people at the top that did. They didn't get that. Well, Kevin Feige is the first studio executive who's had any kind of power that's turned into, and let's face it, whether anyone wants to call him this or not, it's true. He is the most successful producer in the history of Hollywood, and certainly the most successful producer as far as franchises go. And everybody thinks that, oh, the success is let's have a multiple film universe. It's not the multi-film universe that is what makes it appealing. No, it's having a producing force at the top like Kevin Feige that inherently understands exactly what they're doing. Star Trek desperately needs somebody in that position, doesn't have it. And the thing is, the problem is you can't just have like a writer that knows. You have to have a writer-producer. You have to have somebody that knows, well, how do you spend $150 million or $200 million effectively? I mean, the studios don't always have that. They make a movie like Doolittle with of course, Robert Downey Jr., you'd think that was a no-brainer, right? Well, there were decisions made on that film across the board that led it, well, to be, let's face it, a disaster. Because the problem is, at the studio level, you don't have executives that have actually made movies. Kevin Feige, 13 Marvel movies he worked on before he took up his position as head of the MCU. There's nobody in Hollywood like that. Well, at least now at Warner Brothers, they've understood. It's still controlled by the studio itself. I mean, Walter Hamada, I don't exactly know. I mean, I used to work in feature production at Warner Brothers under Senior Vice President Bill Young, but I don't. But it looks to me like they're thinking out of the box. And this, what's so exciting about this is, look, if you hire Michael Keaton to play an older Batman in a Flashpoint movie, yeah, you can stick him in a Batgirl movie too. But you know what they're thinking about? It might not have been reported. Batman Beyond. I've talked a lot about how on the John Campy show, John and I have gotten back and forth about Batman Beyond. But anybody who watched Batman Beyond, it's really cool. And the same way that Miles Morales worked in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I mean, think about it. You've got Into the Spider-Verse, which showed you can have multiple iterations of Spider-Man come back. It doesn't affect Peter Parker. You introduce Miles Morales, and you introduce a pantheon of other Spider characters. You win an Academy Award. You had to have... Lord and Miller knew. And so, introducing... You think Michael Keaton's going to come in and be in a Batgirl movie? Are you kidding me? He'll probably do that. I'm telling you. If they make a Flashpoint movie, they're going to make a Batman Beyond movie. I guarantee it. I guarantee it. That's if this happens. Because why wouldn't you? You've already got... the studios are like, well, how do we make a Batman Beyond movie? Well, you watch the show. You watch the animated series, which was terrific. You have an old Batman, and Michael Keaton doesn't have to be old, I don't put on the bat suit Batman. You kidding? If you make a Batman Beyond movie, you don't think Batman and Terry McGinnis are going to team up and kick ass? Who wouldn't want to see that? They've already got this. They've got this. It's the plan is there. They're in talks. Let's hope it happens. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but if it happens, it's pretty damn exciting. And it shows that finally at the top, at the executive level where it counts, maybe the marketing department finally pulled their head out of their asses. Remember, the marketing department at Warner Brothers was taking credit 10 years ago for being the prime mover behind the success of Inception. We didn't understand this movie. We didn't think anyone would show up. How did it make almost $900 million? How about because Christopher Nolan and his team knew how to make a kick-ass movie that really made moviegoers want to roll out and see it? The problem is it's always the executives. It's always the decision-making at the top because they don't really know. Why is the Marvel Cinematic Universe successful? Because Louis Esposito, Victoria Alonso? Is it Victoria Alonso? And Kevin Feige. They know. They know. Three Musketeers. They get it. All we need is people at the top for all of these franchises. It's amazing to me that the first people... You don't just hire some production company because, oh, hey, they make TV, so let's just give them Star Trek. Give them Star Trek. It doesn't work that way. What you need, if you had somebody at the top who could run Star Trek the way that Kevin Feige ran the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Star Trek would be huge. It would be huge instead of being as divisive as it is. But this news gives me great joy. I have great faith in this, and I think if this happens, I think you're going to see a Batman Beyond movie announced. I really do. They've figured it out. You bring Henry Cavill back to play the Man of Steel. I think it's all good. I think the people at Warner Brothers, the executives at Warner Brothers, now that isn't to say, are we going to get a Birds of Prey movie? You know what? The problem with the Birds of Prey movie is what they wanted to make it about was not what they should have made it about. Now, I don't want to get into agenda-based storytelling, but they certainly didn't give us the Harley Quinn Birds of Prey movie that they should have. And again, there's still missteps being made, but there is hope, and I'm excited. I'm very excited. Very, very excited. Now, in other Batman news, and on the other side of the spectrum, there is a moment of sadness. I would like to talk about this. Director Joel Schumacher passed away at 80 after a year-long bout of cancer. Now, for those of you who might not know who Joel Schumacher is right away, of course, he directed movies like Lost Boys and Flatliners and Falling Down, which I love. Of course, he directed Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. Directed Cousins, the remake. Kazan? Now, I was lucky. When I was at USC back in 88 and 89, I had a class that was taught by a professor named Max Lamb, and it was called the Visiting Artists Seminar. And what happened was, every Tuesday night, Max Lamb would bring in a luminary from the film business to speak with us. This was post Lost Boys, pre-Flatliners. And Joel Schumacher came. It was a small class, I think 15 to 20 students. And Joel Schumacher came and spoke for 3 hours. And it was very funny. He came in the room, he got up on a table in front of the class, and he sat, crossed his legs like a Maharaji or Indian style, whatever you want to call it, and sat and began to speak. And he was very accessible and spoke to us during the break. You could go up to him. And then when I was working at Warner Brothers later, after that, the year later, I ran into him a number of times, and he was always very jovial, and he was a character and so much fun to talk to, and very, very inspirational. And, he really liked sharing his knowledge. He'd been a set designer, art director, writer, and he passed away at 80. This is from Variety, and Carmel Dagan wrote this. Joel Schumacher, costume designer turned director of films including St. Elmo's Fire, The Lost Boys, and Falling Down, as well as 2 Batman films, died in New York City on Monday morning after a year-long battle with cancer. He was 80. Schumacher brought his fashion background to directing a run of stylish films for the 80s and 90s that were not always critically acclaimed, but continued to be well-loved by audiences for capturing the feel of the era. Schumacher was handed the reins of the Batman franchise when Tim Burton exited Warner Brothers' Cape Crusader series after 2 enormously successful films. The first movie by Schumacher, Batman Forever, starring Val Kilmer, Tommy Lee Jones, Jim Carrey, and Nicole Kidman, grossed more than $300 million worldwide. Schumacher's second and last film in the franchise was 97's Batman and Robin, with George Clooney as Batman and Arnold Schwarzenegger as the villain Mr. Freeze. For Batman Forever, the openly gay Schumacher introduced nipples to the costumes worn by the Batman and Robin, leaning into the long-standing latent homoeroticism between the two characters. In 2006, Clooney told Barbara Walters he had played Batman as gay. Several years after the Batman debacle, Schumacher directed the feature adaptation of Andrew Lloyd Webber's musical The Phantom of the Opera. Despite tepid reviews, it received 3 Oscar nominations. In 1985, Schumacher struck gold with his third feature film, St. Elmo's Fire, which was the defining Brat Pack movie, which he directed and co-wrote. Brat Packers, including Rob Lowe, Emilio Estevez, Ali Sheedy, as well as a young Demi Moore, starred in a story of a bunch of Georgetown grads making their way through life and love. Even the theme song was a hit and is still played to evoke the era. The film offered a pretty smart take on the complexities of post-college life. His next film was a big hit as well, horror comedy The Lost Boys, about a group of young vampires who dominate a small California town, starring Jason Patric, Kiefer Sutherland, Corey Feldman, and Corey Haim. It became a cult favorite, and a TV series adaptation has long been in the works. Schumacher had a high-concept screenplay by Peter Filardi and an A-list cast: Julia Roberts, Kiefer Sutherland, Kevin Bacon, William Baldwin for the 1990 horror thriller Flatliners. By the way, I was on the set of Flatliners. Man, the medical, the college and the medical, the gothic, where they did the experiments, it was amazing. That was shot at Warner Brothers on the lot. About Eric and medical students experimenting with life and death, and the director hit it fairly big again with a domestic cume of $61 million. While these hits captured the era well, others during that period were misfires, such as 1989's remake of the French hit Kazan Cuisine, called Cousins, and starring Ted Danson and Isabella Rossellini, and the sentimental Dying Young, starring Roberts and Campbell Scott. But in 1993, he showed what he was capable of with a critically hailed Falling Down, starring Michael Douglas as a defense worker who's lost it all and decides to take it out on whoever he comes across. The film played in competition at the Cannes Film Festival. The New York Times said the film exemplifies a quintessentially American kind of pop movie that with skill and wit sends up stereotypical attitudes while also exploiting them with insidious effect. Falling Down is a glitzy, casually cruel, hip, and grim. It's sometimes very funny and often nasty in the way it manipulates one's darkest feelings. Schumacher's next film was also a solid hit. The Client, based on the John Grisham novel, was a highly effective legal thriller that also boasted terrific rapport between Susan Sarandon, his lawyer, and her 11-year-old client, a boy played by Brad Renfro, who witnessed a murder. Between the 2 Batman films, Schumacher directed another Grisham adaptation, A Time to Kill, which I actually really liked, which sported a terrific cast, including Samuel L. Jackson, Kevin Spacey, Sandra Bullock, Ashley Judd, and a career jump-starting turn by a young Matthew McConaughey, and while not without its own weaknesses, asked important questions about race. After the second Batman, he made a much darker, smaller-scale thriller, 8mm, which followed a miscast Nicolas Cage as a family man, private detective in pursuit of those who made what appears to be a snuff film. His next film, 1999's Flawless, about a homophobic cop who suffered a stroke, played by Robert De Niro, and a drag-wearing Philip Seymour Hoffman, was formulaic, the odd couple who couldn't be more different to find out they have a lot in common, but it sported excellent performances by the leads and certainly had heart. Switching gears dramatically, Schumacher made Tigerland, starring a young Colin Farrell in the story of young recruits preparing to go off to Vietnam. It had a gritty look, but while some critics saw an earnest quality, others saw cynicism. Schumacher's 2002 thriller Phone Booth, which reunited the director with Colin Farrell and Kiefer Sutherland, and intriguingly trapped Farrell's anti-hero in the title New York City phone booth for almost all the film's running time, had critics and audiences alike talking, even if the ending was a cop-out. Anyway, I'll put this in the live chat. You can read the rest of it. But I was a big fan of Joel Schumacher as a person. And, he even once said in a magazine interview that he'd slept with 20,000 people. So I would say, good for Joel. That was a life well lived. I'm sorry to see him go at 80 after a bout of cancer, but he's left behind a great body of work, all worth revisiting. So that is the Batman news of the day. But I'm so very excited about the potential of what this casting news means to, well, one, the Flashpoint movie, because I would love to see that movie get made. I love the fact that my Michael Keaton Hot Toys Batman figure probably will go up in price, which is always a good thing, even though, who are we kidding? I'm never going to sell it. I need it to go in the Hot Toys Batmobile, right? So there you go. Anyway, I'm going to jump in. I have a long letter to read that I did not read, that I said I was going to read yesterday, and I forgot to read it. So I'm just going to start off right now, and I'm going to read this letter. And it comes from our man, Jeffrey Mao, longtime imagination connoisseur, longtime member of the Post-Geek Singularity community. And it's a good letter, but it's a little long, I warn you. This comes in from Jeffrey Mao. Hi, Rob. I figured that I would contribute a regular letter detailing some things that I've watched recently on physical media, or provide you know what? Before I start this letter, I want to say one more thing, just because I want to talk about it because it's dope. As you all know, I read a lot, and I look at books the same way I look at movies. I get just as excited about books as I do with movies. I really do, I swear. So there was a book I was waiting to get that was written by Lawrence Wright, who usually writes a lot of nonfiction. And he wrote a book called The Looming Tower that was turned into a terrific miniseries starring Jeff Daniels about the lead up to 9/11. And if you haven't seen the miniseries, I highly recommend it. And the book is just as good. So check that out. But he came out with this book called The End of October. Now, if there's one thing I love, it's a subcategory of fiction that I've loved that has become more relevant in recent days. I've loved books and stories about pandemics. And I'm not just saying that to be fashionable. The first two books I fell in love with about pandemics, one of my favorite books I've ever read, Stephen King's The Stand. Man, I love that book. Also, when I was at summer camp, I want to say I was either 13 or 14 when I was at the Flying Horseshoe Ranch in Cle Elum, Washington. There is a Grand Dude Ranch down in Teanaway Valley where deer and elk are playing right near my front door. Oh, how I wish I was there again down in Teanaway Valley where my lonely heart will trouble me no more. That was the camp song. But one of the things I did when I was at camp was I always took really lurid horror novels that had all kinds of awesome sex and violence that I should not have been reading about when I was that age. But my parents were just happy that I was such a voracious reader. They had no idea. I was also getting my rocks off, you know what I'm saying? Sex, death, violence. It was awesome. So I'm at this great bucolic summer camp, riding horses. It was fantastic. I loved it. But at the same time, that was the first time that I read Graham Masterton's Plague. Now, Graham Masterton, of course, wrote movies or books like The Manitou, that the movie of the same name that William Girdler directed was based on. But I love books about plagues. Of course, Graham Masterton, he wrote lots of other horror novels that are great, and I have many of them. He wrote more. There's been many. They should remake The Manitou and make Revenge of the Manitou and Burial. They could do a Manitou trilogy now. I don't know why they don't do that. They remake everything else. Why haven't they remade The Manitou and go back to the books? Anyway. So this book, The End of October, is an epic book about a global pandemic. And you would have thought that Lawrence Wright would have written this book in quarantine, but he didn't. I mean, you don't write a novel like in 2 months and have it come out that quickly, not unless you're John Bolton. But this book is so much fun to read, and the reason it's so much fun to read is because Lawrence Wright, because he's a nonfiction writer, he's done a lot of magazine writing. There's so much great research in this book. There's all of these delicious facts about coronaviruses because it's a novel coronavirus that's in this book. How could he have known? Well, because that's what we've seen over the last 20 years. And anybody worth their salt, like if you saw Steven Soderbergh's Contagion or you read Lawrence Wright's book, it's like, wow, all this information about novel coronaviruses was already out there. And you'd think that people would plan for these kinds of things. But anyway, this book is so chock-a-block full of just awesome detail about everything. Transmission. I mean, I just read a chapter about people are going to have to shelter at home. I literally laughed out loud. I mean, this book, it's incredible. It's so much fun to read. And I'm sure it, to be honest, gets a little goofy at the end, I will admit. Gets a little big. Can't just be a pandemic. It's got to be terrorism and bioterrorism and warfare. It's, you know, but it's delicious. And yeah, the writing might be a little clunky, but it's faster than a speeding bullet. I can't recommend it enough. That would be The End of October by Lawrence Wright. And by the way, no one paid me to say it, so maybe they should. Who put the book out? I don't know. I don't know what the publisher is. It's from Knopf. So okay, give me some money, Knopf. But you don't have to. But anyway, check it out. It's a lot of fun to read. And it's just after we've already been through it, when you read the book, you're like, shouldn't we have known? Yes, we should have. Anyway, back to Jeffrey Mau's. You can see I'm riding this wave of excitement on this Michael Keaton news. Now, back to Jeffrey Mau's letter. It's a long one. Hi, Rob. I figured I would contribute a regular letter detailing some things I've watched recently on physical media, or provide a brief discussion of my thoughts on a few topics in the physical media realm. This will probably be something that I'll do when I can't think of a more topical, crazy, or thought-provoking subject, as I usually do. So in terms of stuff that I've purchased recently, and this is not a complete list, just what I can think of, I have the Edwidge, pronounced like Siege, Fenich with a hard C, George Hilton trilogy from Shameless Films. Oh, which is The Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward, The Case of the Bloody Iris, and All the Colors of the Dark. I've seen all the Colors of the Dark. This also completes the trilogy of Sergio Martino-directed films starring the divine Signora Fenich, and the other films being Your Vice is a Locked Room and Only I Have the Key, which is from Arrow. Not much needs to be said about Fenich, the prima donna of giallo, other than check her out, and I do mean it. For 4K, I've purchased the aforementioned Top Gun, In Another Letter, 1917, which I haven't watched yet, The Blues Brothers and Joker, which I have watched, Jaws, which of course I watched with my kids for the first time, and I have Leon the Professional on order from Family Video. I had bought Interstellar from them a while back as I'm building my Christopher Nolan 4K collection. I'm still in the middle of watching it, so I'll report back when I'm done. I also picked up the Kino Lorber Blu-ray of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly on the same Family Video sale. I already have it on Blu-ray, the triple bill with The Magnificent Seven and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which was one of those bargain basement buys from my local supermarket. I lucked out with The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, as I'd put it in my cart on Kino's site for their Memorial Day sale. However, I forgot to check out, and it timed out on me. Then I saw the Family Video sale had it for less, and I swooped on it. Jaws was, of course, awesome looking in 4K, and definitely one of the 4Ks of the year so far, although I'm sure Dawn of the Dead will rival it, at least for you. It is my most eagerly awaited physical media release practically, I think, ever, which I ordered from Diabolic DVD, which is offering a limited number from their UK distributor. You might still be able to snag one. I also have Arrow's Flash Gordon on pre-order, and I think that's it for 4K. Although I'm looking forward to the Daughters of Darkness 4K from Blue Underground coming out in the fall. Me too. Blue Underground has been impressive in terms of their 4K output, with Lucio Fulci's Zombie and New York Ripper, William Lustig's Maniac, and Fulci's House by the Cemetery coming out in August. It's nice to see the boutique houses doing 4K scans of exploitation and horror movies from the 70s and 80s. Come on, Criterion. If Blue Underground can do it, so can you. I don't think Criterion's ever going to go 4K. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think they are. I'm not sure if I'll get any of their 4Ks yet, although I have great things. I bet you say I've heard great things. Perhaps I'll wait for a price drop. But back to the Blues Brothers. Okay, so if you watch other films that were released around the same time on 4K, like Apocalypse Now, The Shining, and Blade Runner, sure, the Blues Brothers isn't going to stand up to them. It's a different film to them, shot differently with a different intent. While Landis is an excellent director with a strong resume, and there was certainly a decent budget for the film, it clearly was not meant as a prestige film in the same way the others were. There are a few flat, soft shots, sure, but that's to be expected. But the transfer is by no means poor at all, and I'm sure Universal did their best to source the best elements for the transfer. The film is not meant to be a visual spectacle, but there are some specific scenes where 4K really makes them stand out. The beginning, where you see Jake released from prison, looks quite good. The shot where he was leaving prison to meet Elwood and he's lit from behind with a heavenly light probably benefits the most from 4K's HDR. There's another scene where the benefit of 4K is subtle but noticeable. The brothers have gathered the old band in the car, discussing getting back together. There's a close-up of Jake, and he still has his hat and glasses on, and his face is mostly in shadow, but you can still see every pore on Belushi's face, even what's in shadow. I don't think you would get the detail in any other format. The scenes in a brighter light are obviously better looking, and the climactic car chase looks great in 4K. You can see Dan Aykroyd doing some of the driving. The scenes don't look sped up, that is, they're really driving that fast through the Chicago streets. And kudos to Landis for not using any rear projection or process shots in the chase scenes, with the only special effects being when the Bluesmobile does its backflip and the Nazi's car drops through the air. Though the car drop still looks quite good, and I wonder how they did it. Joker is among the best-looking new films out on 4K, and it was a very handsomely made and acted film that sought to capture the feeling of those late, great 70s and early 80s films that influenced it. While I enjoyed the performance by Joaquin Phoenix as Joker and the whole did he imagine it or not narrative, I have to say that I'm not sure why exactly it made $1 billion. This is not to say that I don't think it deserved its box office take, but just that this was a film that clearly, if it had made anything more than $500 million, Warner Brothers would have been ecstatic. But since its success caught everyone by surprise, I guess I have to include myself in that group. I wanted to finish with a shout-out to one of the craziest, most insane, yet most awesome and influential purveyors of exploitation awesomeness, Jesus Jess Franco. What more can be said about the director of such hits as Venus in Furs, Kill Me Monster, a favorite of mine, Vampiros Lesbos, She Killed in Ecstasy, Night of Open Sex, 99 Women, and a bunch of titles all based on or inspired by the Marquis de Sade. I'm a huge fan of his, by the way. His films are a genre unto themselves, really. Blue Underground has his Eugenie, the story of her journey into perversion, coming out soon in a new Blu-ray transfer. That title is alone enough. If I were to rate his greatest actresses in order, it would be Soledad Miranda, Maria Rome, Marie, I can't even pronounce her name, Lishdal, Rolzaba Neri, and his wife, Lena Romay. Lena is like the Mikey of the crew, willing to do anything and show anything. While the other girls all exude a degree of class, sophistication, and beauty, Lena is none of those, and she seems to revel in her roles that call for stuff even as other actresses would not do. Franco's films are all over the place in terms of quality or where to find them. Many are on Prime in varying degrees of image quality, and many are not the preferred cut. You'll find many films on Prime and other streaming services have been edited and often cruelly edited. You can find his titles released physically by Severin, the aforementioned Blue Underground, Arrow, Mondo Macabro, and I'm sure plenty of others. One thing that you may find is the same title can be released by a US distributor and also by a UK distributor, so it gets kind of confusing, especially since we can order UK titles fairly easily, and often they're cheaper than the US version and ship for free. It helps to do your research. Follow the various houses on social media, especially for sales. That's all for now. Keep watching that physical media. Well, Jeff, I love this letter. Thank you for sending it in, because anybody who's talking physical media is talking the kind of thing that I want to hear. Now, a lot of you are sending in questions, so I'm going to jump over there and start taking them, and I'll jump back to, I've got some more letters to read, but I'll jump back to those. Anonymous sends in a tip and says, so what's next? Blazing Saddles, every Quentin Tarantino movie, South Park, is every single movie in Hollywood going to be scrapped because of PC culture? Where does it end? We are destined to be doomed forever. Well, I would like to point out that, we came from a puritanical PC state. And I understand that Generation Z, and there's a lot of people in college now, that they don't believe in freedom of speech. It's all about feelings. But the great thing about worrying about how you feel about something is that the real world, the universe, which is indifferent to your suffering, is a place you're going to have to spend the rest of your life. So the sooner you learn how to deal with things that make you uncomfortable, and the sooner you learn how to deal with ideas that you might find, difficult to swallow, the better off we're all going to be. So this idea that we're going to snap back to PC culture, I think is going to quickly go by the wayside, because eventually what's going to happen is, like the aforementioned Jess Franco movies that Jeffrey Mao just talked about, if you really start delving into not the cinematic history of famous movies, but if you start looking into the cinematic history of exploitation films, especially films that were made in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, talk about problematic. I mean, what are you going to do? Get rid of the legacy of blaxploitation films? Get rid of Nuns in Trouble movie? Get rid of rape revenge films? I mean, there's a lot of rough trade movies that a lot of people aren't even aware of that exist, that you can buy on physical media. So I think that, I mean, you know, you go back, there was a time, I think, look, clearly our society, we all need to respect each other more. I mean, all peoples. The whole point of this show, what do I say at the end of the show every day, every time? I've said it for 400, well, today will be the 449th time I'll say it at the end of the show, is that every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. But the thing is, the story they tell you might not be something you're comfortable listening to, but that doesn't mean it's any less valid. The world's a rough place, and we have to start learning to understand that history, a charnel house of human beings being awful to one another. You might try and cancel history, but eventually we're going to find out that there will be nothing left until we come to grips with the fact that you cannot judge people or history from 400 or 300 or 200 or 100 or even 50 years ago by the standards that we have today. We will be lost, because the problem is history already happened. If you're going to take down a statue, or you're going to say someone's problematic, well, welcome to the planet Earth. We have to learn to deal with that. We have to learn to deal with history. We have to learn from history. So, hey, we don't do that anymore. And pulling down historical figures or statues or monuments or things like that because they might have been problematic. Again, the world is very three-dimensional. You might be upset with one thing a person did, but what about what they did later? Like Ulysses S. Grant. Very problematic man. The way he treated indigenous peoples, the fact that, yes, he owned slaves, but then again, he was instrumental in defeating the Confederacy, and he fucked up the KKK. So the question is, what do we do with a man like that? A complex historical figure that lived in a very, very different time than we live in today. Not really for me to say, but I think, Anonymous, that we really need to remember that the world is complex. Individuals are complex. And the way we are now, we're going after one trait that someone has, and we're going to get rid of them for that trait. Well, eventually, everybody is going to fall under that microscope, and I don't think any of us would survive it. So hopefully, Anonymous, things will get a little better. People will just chill out. I believe in people, and I think cooler heads will eventually prevail. Murray Reich sends in a tip and says, I've actually pre-ordered a mask that has a zipper on it so I can eat and drink in a movie theater. Hope to give feedback soon whenever it arrives. Well, please do, Murray. I want to hear how does that work? How does that work? Problem is, man, is it going to be loud? Like, I would not like to listen to everybody's zippers opening and closing during the runtime of a movie. That would drive me insane. Anonymous sends in a tip and says, it's utter chaos in New York City. For 2 weeks straight, there have been nonstop fireworks every night without fail till 4 a.m. They're even shooting it towards people, and because many have gotten injured, the corrupted mayor and the cops are sitting around doing nothing about it. Yeah, I mean, again, Anonymous, I don't know what to say other than right now, as I've been saying, not all law enforcement is bad. We need law enforcement in our civilization because of, case in point, people, there's been a lot of fireworks going off here where I live as well. And I know people want to be able to do that, but you can never, your fellow man is never going to be counted on to be civil. So we need checks and balances. And I'm sorry to hear that that's what's going on in New York. Willow sends in a tip and says, my mom, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, gentle beings, I have a Willow Yang letter to read for this show. It's very exciting. You're going to love it. My mom doesn't want to watch animated movies because there's no acting in them. Which animated movie, preferably available on Disney Plus, should I show her to try and change her mind? That's a good question. You know, the first thing that popped into my mind, Willow, is Up. Up. Maybe your mom would dig Up. She might dig that. A little bit more serious. Inside Out might be one. And I'll tell you, A movie that I like, I actually worked on the special features for this on Blu-ray. A movie that I find very funny because it works because of the voice talent is The Emperor's New Groove. Patrick Warburton, Cusco. Cusco's poison. Poison for Cusco. You know, I David Spade. I love Emperor's New Groove. Check that out. Those are the first things that popped into my head. Lancelot Narian from the UK sends in a tip and says, "Hey, Rob, such a shame. Rest in peace, Joel Schumacher. What's your favorite of his films? Did you like any of Batman Forever? What did you think of St. Elmo's Fire? All the best." You know what? I found St. Elmo's Fire very watchable. I loved all the cast. And, of course, it came out, you know, my senior year of high school and my first year of college. So it resonated with me. I enjoyed it. But I think Falling Down is probably my favorite movie of his. And although I really do like Flatliners, although I think it's, you know, I like the subject matter, but it's not the greatest movie in the world. And I do enjoy Lost Boys. I don't love it. And Batman Forever was okay. There's some of it I like, but some of it, you know me and verisimilitude. Senor Ashish is here and sends in a tip and says, "The trend of actors reprising beloved characters continues. From Bill and Ted, Batman to Han Solo, the icing on the cake." And when you say Han Solo, I knew what you mean. Han Solo meaning Han from the Fast and the Furious franchise. And remember, he created that character in a different franchise or different movie altogether, which was Justin Lin's Better Luck Tomorrow. So I think maybe even before that. But anyway, Sam Jackson's character from Jurassic Park is in Jurassic World 3 with a cybernetic arm that turns into a dino blaster. Oh, wait. The icing on the cake would, for me, be Sam Jackson's character from Jurassic Park 3, or Jurassic Park in Jurassic World 3 with a cybernetic arm that turns into a dino blaster. Hold on to your butts. You know what? Is he in it? He didn't. Did Sam Jackson die in Jurassic Park? I don't remember. Wow. Ray sent in a super chat and says, "Wait, what? Guess I'm watching The Flash again." Also, rest in peace, Joel Schumacher. Yeah, I know, right? Lancelot Narian's here and says, again, "Rob Meister, do you think they should do a faithful adaptation of The Dark Knight Returns with Keaton? I've given myself goose pimples just thinking about it." You know what? I can only go as far as Batman Beyond. But the idea, if they made Dark Knight Returns with Keaton, the problem is, I think, they couldn't bring Jack Nicholson back because he's just not in good health. I don't know what they would do. But, I mean, that would be, I would love that. But you know what? We live in such strange times, I wouldn't put it past DC. I'm sure that was on the... Look, if they do, as I suspect they will, if these talks with Michael Keaton go through, if they go through, and if he's signed up, I think that's definitely going to be something that's on the table. Because why not? Chris sends in a tip and says, "So Crisis on Infinite Earths is playing a tribute for the movies. Makes sense now, as we need Grant Custin as the Flash, and the movies and TV shows are connected. I love Michael Keaton as Batman. Thank God he's returning." Well, isn't it interesting? Because Ezra Miller appeared in Crisis on Infinite Earths. So, wow. I mean, I don't know if it's going to happen, but there's a lot of craziness going on, and I wouldn't put it past them. They are talking about... I don't think anything is off the table. I think what's really going to be telling is when we hear more details about Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. Because if they're going to embrace all this stuff, who knows where it's going to end. It's going to be very interesting to see. Double Crit sends in a super chat and says, "John Campea is on hiatus, so you're the captain now." Well, Double Crit, I appreciate you saying that. But you know what? John, I mean, the guy's one of the hardest working men in the YouTube space. He busts his ass on his show, and it's a grind. And, we haven't really taken any time off. I know I've been doing this show I think I've taken one day off in months. And, I've still been working on the Netflix show that I've been working on, which, by the way, I can say that my official title is Animatic Editor. I was the animatic editor on the show. So that was pretty cool. And we just, you just burn out. And in John's spare time, he's been making his documentary about movie trailers, and it's turning out great. Which is awesome. So I'm glad that you're here. I hope. Look, it's funny. I don't think a lot of people from the John Campea show have come over to watch this show, but maybe they will now. Who knows? But I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to have all of you new viewers. You're all welcome. All of you. If you haven't come here before, I call my audience imagination connoisseurs that are all part of the Post-Geek Singularity community, which is something I made up. What is the Post-Geek Singularity community? Well, basically, a guy named Ray Kurzweil wrote a book called The Coming Singularity, and it's all about the singularity is the idea that artificial intelligence will achieve sentience, will self-awareness, and can think on its own. That is the singularity. And then kind of what happened in Her, the movie Her. Well, we live in what I like to call the post-geek singularity, because all of my geeky interests in comic books and movies and science fiction and music and role-playing games or whatever, they were fairly niche. But over the last 30 years, and I really think I started to see the increase. I mean, it really started in 1990, where you had a generation of kids, and especially what was critical to the post-geek singularity is the addition of women into this space. Now, Amy Dallin and I used to talk about the fact that there were always women in fandom. There were, but they were outnumbered by men, I would say, at least 9-1. Well, what happened in the 90s, or what I saw happening, is with things like the character of Death that was introduced in Sandman, with anime becoming more popular and with video games becoming more popular, those confluence of things brought women into the fan space, and now it's pretty much equal, which is pretty exciting. And so once that occurred, that was one of the things. But then all of us, as we grew up with Star Wars and video games and all of these things, the interests of people in what was once niche stuff exploded. And now everybody grows up with Star Wars, and everybody grows up with the MCU, and the fact that Avengers Endgame is now the most successful film at the box office ever made proves that what was once our nerdy, geeky, imagination connoisseur realm is now for everybody, which is amazing. So that's why we live in the post-geek singularity. It all exploded. Everybody's a geek. Everybody's a nerd. Everybody is welcome. And that's been pretty exciting. Zach Losel says, thanks, Rob. Now I have to get that Batmobile. I got to tell you, this Hot Toys Batmobile is awesome. The machine guns pop up. The cockpit, or the what do you call it? The interior, incredibly detailed. It's very, very cool. It's a very, very cool piece. And as Ferris Bueller says, if you have the means, I do recommend picking one up. So yes, Zach, you definitely need it. Stubble McShave says, I can't wait for the Dune teaser trailer. Do you think we'll get one before the end of July? You know what? I think beyond a shadow of a doubt that we will absolutely get a Dune trailer, a teaser, a trailer, whatever you want to call it, in front of Tenet. It's the same audience. And if Tenet doesn't move off of its release date, which I am not necessarily convinced of, there are coronavirus cases going up in, I think I heard 24 states today, and they're not coming down. We've plateaued. We're still in the middle of a pandemic. I don't know. I know studios are hoping to get these movies out. I know Tenet has not moved off its July 31st release date. We shall see. But I think we absolutely will get a Dune trailer in front of Tenet, because why wouldn't you? I cannot wait. Senor Ashish sends in a tip and says, the problem with Snyder's DCEU wasn't that it treated the material realistically. The problem was that they treated the material too seriously, to the point of trying to make deep, artsy, adult existential dramas that seemed to emulate a Terrence Malick film. Well, Senor Ashish, I don't necessarily think you're wrong about that. But what I find interesting is that now that the Snyder Cut is going to be finished, what I really like about that is I've spoken a lot about, obviously, my love of Man of Steel, and how I think that the Ultimate Edition of Batman v Superman is overstuffed. I've often talked about how I do like the mythic quality of it all. And I thought that the Ultimate Edition, I like the Ultimate Edition quite a bit. I'm really excited. And by the way, for all of you who come at me and go, well, you never supported the Snyder Cut. It's not that I never supported the Snyder Cut. It's not that I just thought it was never going to happen because I understand the economics of the film business. And the problem was that Justice League, 1, it had already been made. So 2, if you're going to go do the Snyder Cut, who's going to pay for it? And most importantly, how are they going to see a return on investment? There was no way it was going to happen. But then, as somebody reminded me, back in November on this show, I said now with the announcement of HBO Max coming, I even said, I think it was on November 24th, I said, for all of you who love the Snyder Cut or the idea of the Snyder Cut coming out, now there is a viable economic model with which a Snyder Cut could be completed. And as we know, as I always said from the beginning, it's going to cost tens of millions of dollars to finish. And the head of HBO Max said, I only wish it was going to cost $30 million. And I'm going to be on the Zod Rider podcast tomorrow, or show, and I'm going to be talking all about that. So I think it's going to be pretty cool. But I'm glad that Zack Snyder will have his trilogy of his DCEU, because while they've spun off Wonder Woman and Aquaman that he, of course, cast and introduced in the first place, they can now move away from that continuity and do whatever the hell they want, which I think is fine. I think that's fine. But I agree. I mean, I think that Zach's take was like that. But that's what I liked about his take. It was different. It was unique. It was unique to him. And I always like to get authorship when I see movies. I want to know that I'm in the midst of somebody who you might not agree with their take, but you're getting a certain vision that's uniquely theirs. And I think that the Snyder version of Batman and Superman was really interesting and unique to him. Did I agree with all the choices they make? No. Would I have wanted to see less goofiness? I would like to have seen a much. Look, I didn't need Wonder Woman or Doomsday or any of that in Batman v Superman. I would love to have seen exactly what they said, Dawn of Justice. I would have liked to have seen two men, more civil war. They're both on diametrically opposed sides of law enforcement. Batman is vigilante. He beats people to a pulp, and Superman's like, no, you can't do that. And the movie could have just been about their struggle, diametrically opposed to one another's methodology. They could have just gone at it. They didn't need all the rest of that stuff. I understand why it's in there. They didn't need it. They could have made that movie for, $100 million, and it still could have been really exciting if you concentrated. But instead, we got a very operatic, very giant movie with Doomsday and Wonder Woman, and there's some great imagery in it, and I wish that, I'd watched the 3-hour version of that too. I was kind of hoping that maybe Zach would there's 3 versions of Watchmen. Well, if you're doing the Snyder Cut, why not do an even more ultimate edition of Batman v Superman? I would have dug that. I would have watched that. But anyway, so Senior Ashish, I like that comment about Terrence Malick especially. Fortunato is here. Hey, R&B, strange thought got into my head. What are your thoughts on movie Oscar diversity, especially the changing racial requirements, e.g., 60% human, 10% orc, 20% dro, etc.? I've got a great letter I'm going to read, by the way, on the show about that very thing. But on a serious note, the winner Parasite was not very diverse. Thoughts? Well, here are my thoughts about that, Fortunato. As you pointed out, can you imagine? I mean, oh my God, Parasite only had Koreans in it. Where's the diversity? The problem that I have with all of this talk about diversity is that it's American diversity. It's diversity the way we as Americans see it. And I think, again, Americans tend to forget that there's the rest of the world. And what we want is we want to see diverse voices from us, from America. We want to see the various, all the ethnic groups or racial groups or genders or whatever from this country represented. And I don't necessarily have a problem with that. But, it's not like Americans are clamoring to watch movies from, say, India. And think about it. How much of the world's population is actually in India? But is anybody watching their films? What about Asian cinema? I've loved Asian cinema my whole life. So when people talk about, there's not enough Asians represented in movies. Really? Well, it's what they're talking about is they're talking about movies that are made in America. And what I would like to see is I wish people there are so many wonderful movies being made around the world. And, I don't see anybody clamoring. It's like, why aren't you guys watching more? What I loved about Parasite was it was a Korean movie that won Best Picture. And it also, Bong Joon-ho winning Best Director. This is what we need is true worldwide diversity. We need the entire human race to be thought of as one race. And I think that, again, I talk about the my underlying thoughts about this, that the only way to do that is we have to have things in this country like great education for everyone. You know what's really strange? In this country, the lower income areas, they get the least amount of money for education. It should be the exact opposite. I mean, obviously everybody should get a great education, but for the places that don't have the money they need for their school programs, those are the places that need the best teachers and that need the most money. And like I've said on this show a million times, what we need as a people, the underlying issue in our country is not race relations necessarily. It's education and healthcare and income inequality. We have to lift people out of poverty. We have to make everybody smart, and we have to make everybody healthy. Because when you have smart and healthy people that are well educated and they don't have to worry about roofs over their heads, or at least they have the basics of raising a family, what they need, only then can we fix our problems. We need smart, healthy people that are not struggling each and every day to make ends meet to take care of their families. These are the underlying issues that we have in this country, and when those things are solved, it'll trickle upwards. Things will get better. We need educated, healthy people from the ground up, from the time they're very young to the time they die. And I think that when it comes to diversity, we need smart, intelligent voices everywhere. And we have to start thinking of ourselves as one race of people, the human race. But we have to acknowledge everything that has been done. Remember, what do I always say on this show? I mean, human beings are not nice. We're not nice to each other. Nobody can be more horrible to their fellow man or fellow women or fellow non-gendered people, however you want to identify, than we can. We need to recognize this and move forward together. That's the only way we're going to survive. Anyway, Mark C. sends in a super chat and says, when a director on camera looks at the audience and apologizes for his film, knowing what a property means to them, you have to tip your hat to the man. His film, Phone Booth, is a favorite of mine. Mark C., I love Phone Booth. It's another great example of movies set in one location, like Buried, the Ryan Reynolds film. I have not seen it yet, but Joseph Gordon-Levitt's 7500, which is about a pilot, or I guess a co-pilot, on a plane, and the whole thing is shot from the cockpit, and it stars Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Man, I want to see that. I want to see that. So I agree. Wait a minute, where was I? What happened? Oh, there we go. Okay. Brendan Sheehy sends in a super chat and says, have you read Dreamcatcher by Stephen King? I did. Not a favorite book of mine. I love Stephen King. I've been reading him my whole life. Not my entire life, because I was too young to have read Carrie when it came out. But soon after. I think I discovered him. Night Shift was the first Stephen King book I bought. And then I went and read everything he's put out. Dreamcatcher, I'd put it up there with the Tommy Knockers. Kind of tough. And the movie, not so good either. But, what can you do? Evan Newman sends in a tip and says, with Keaton returning as Batman, I would love to see Michelle Pfeiffer return as Catwoman and Billy D finally get to play Two-Face. Burton could return to direct a Dark Knight Returns-esque movie with them too. None of this is likely, but I can dream. Evan, that's an interesting idea, because if you can't have Nicholson's Joker come back, and after all, maybe you couldn't, those other characters could. And you could do a riff on The Dark Knight Returns. Could be interesting. Phage Lives sends in a super chat and says, shameless plug for me. I turned 44 today. Yeah, I know that I'm shameless. Well, you know what? You're supporting the channel, so I think all of us can wish you a happy birthday. The question is, Phage, how do you feel about turning 44? Is it good for you? Do you feel good? You looking forward to the future? You excited about what's coming out? Being an imagination connoisseur, I mean, we're getting Black Widow, we're getting the Eternals, we're getting Fast Saga with the return of Han Solo, Justice for Han. I mean, we're getting No Time to Die, we're getting Tenet, we're getting Top Gun Maverick, and all the other good stuff that's coming out on physical media. I'm finally getting a Dawn of the Dead and the Ultimate box set where they've gone back to the original negative elements. I mean, if I get hit by a bus anytime soon, or I drop dead of a stroke, I'm gonna be pissed. If there's an afterlife, I'm like, come on, man. Send me back. Just give me another couple of years, because this sucks. So, this great stuff today. How do you feel about 44? Happy birthday. James Lucas sends in a super chat and says, Rob, do you think the Nolan brothers will ever return to a large franchise such as Marvel, DC, or Star Wars? They make such great original content. James, I don't think so. Because I think that the goal in life is to make your own, the work that you want to do. And I think Christopher and Jonathan Nolan, we got their 3 Batman movies, and I think all 3 of them are staggering achievements to varying degrees. And I think that if you have the power in Hollywood to make movies that you want, I mean, Christopher Nolan's got another, if you look at Scorsese or even Clint Eastwood, Nolan's got 30 or 40 good years left to him. And if he's going to continue to make movies, if he can go from things like Interstellar to Dunkirk, to Tenet, who knows what he's going to do? I don't, maybe he'll adapt a famous book or something, but I only want him to, God, how many filmmakers at his level can work at the studio level and give us original visions? I mean, I don't want to see him go and do more franchise stuff. He did his franchise trilogy. We have it. It's indelible. And I think you're right. They make such great original content. Evan Newman sends in a tip and says, R.I.P. Joel Schumacher. I love The Lost Boys and have a soft spot for Batman Forever. Forever came out when I was 4, and I watched it all the time with my friends. It, along with Batman, Mask of the Phantasm, are what started me on my imagination connoisseur journey. Evan, I love to hear that. I think Joel Schumacher would have loved to have heard that too. Cry Little Sister. And it's great. It's I love hearing about what started everybody off on their imagination connoisseur journey. By the way, if you want to send me letters, you can, for anybody who hasn't watched the show before, at the Burnettwork.net website. All the letters I read, you can send them there. I also encourage you to send me videos. Send me videos of your local theater. Send me videos of your collections. Whatever you want to send me. Just remember, you can't put music on them unless you know it's from YouTube, and I won't get a copyright strike. So there you go. James Lucas says, waiting for an episode dedicated to Dawn of the Dead. Ooh, that's a good idea. That's coming. It's coming, but probably not until October. And I will wax rhapsodic about Dawn of the Dead. But that's a good idea, James. Mark C. comes back with a super chat and says, does anyone here know how to reach Nick Barucci of Dynamite Comics? I have a bone to pick about an art book that's been delayed 5 times in the last year. I do not know, Mark. Does anybody know him? Nick Barucci of Dynamite Comics. I want to know if they're going to put out more hardcovers of American Flag. Come on, man. Alexander Wilson sends in a tip and says, physical media has gone the way of print, gone the way of brick and mortar. Warren Buffett wouldn't put a dime in physical. Also, Kenya Burris made a Blackish episode about Kaepernick and kneeling to the anthem. ABC would not air the episode. Censorship. Really? Well, I bet they'll air it now. I bet it'll show up now. I mean, can you imagine? Remember the good old days when everybody was mad at Colin Kaepernick for taking a knee? Man, that's ridiculous. They should put that episode back out. I didn't know that, by the way. We should spread that out. GMTC Podcast sends in a super chat and says, the individuals trying to erase history really need to sit down and watch the classic Twilight Zone episode, Death's Head Revisited. Here. I totally agree with you. As a matter of fact, I think a lot of Americans these days could stand to watch Twilight Zone episodes. I really do. Because, actually, that's a great pull. Death's Head Revisited is a great, that's a great pull. Hang on a second. You know what? You remind me of something. Let's see. I'm going to look this up for a second because if I remember correctly, it was written by Rod Serling. And let's see. Oh no, it wasn't directed by who I thought directed it. But actually, that episode came right after It's a Good Life and came right before the Midnight Sun episodes that I liked, season 3. Evan Newman says, one last note on Batman Forever. Schumacher mentioned maybe 10 years ago that he wanted to edit and release a director's cut of the film. While I doubt it would have been very different from the theatrical version, that would have been neat to see. Look, I agree. I think it would have been neat to see, too. Brendan Sheehy sends in a super chat and says, check out Veronica Guerin, directed by Joel Schumacher. Yes, that is a great movie, too. I like that movie a lot, actually. It is good. James sends in a tip and says, do you think Tim Burton will return, and do you think that we can see Brandon Routh Superman again in a Flash movie? Man, if they're bringing back Michael Keaton, why not? Unless they want to have Batman and Superman contemporary. I mean, I could see that happening. These days, who knows? But then again, maybe not. I mean, I think getting a Michael Keaton movie and a Flashpoint movie would be, you're already dealing with reestablishing Flash as a draw for his own film series. So maybe not in that movie, but I definitely could see that happening. Because how cool would that be? I mean, the thing is, here's what's I think the great disconnect between the studio executives and the audience. Studio executives, because they weren't necessarily fans, they didn't understand. Like, if you were to go in, as a matter of fact, it was discounted. Like when Rick Berman was running Star Trek in the beginning, when Ron Moore came on board and wrote his episode The Bonding, he sold a freelance script. He couldn't let anyone know he was a Star Trek fan. They didn't want anyone they thought that, we don't want those people. Now what's interesting on Star Trek is there's people that say they're fans, but they want to do everything to update Star Trek and let's change it and make it more modern. Wrong approach. What you have to do is embrace what the fans who love this stuff, it's like what you got to do is when Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens were writing Lord of the Rings, they knew they had to change certain things because they were adapting Tolkien's works to film. So yes, Gimli said things that Legolas has said or whatever. They got rid of Tom Bombadil. That's adaptation. But they immersed themselves in, they didn't want to change Tolkien's work. They didn't want to change the approach. They lean into it. And what they're learning is, like, look, you're not going to directly adapt, say, Civil War or Age of Ultron, because you can't. But you can keep the spirit of those things alive, like the schism between Tony Stark and Steve Rogers, which was at the heart of the idea of Civil War. Then they adapt that idea to film. That's what they need to do. So I think it's important to remember. I mean, executives were like, they're like, we don't need the fan stuff. But the fan, it's like, why have they never adapted a Star Trek book? Why? There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of great Star Trek books. There's even brand new Star Trek series like Peter David's New Frontier series or the Vanguard series that was put together by some of the great Star Trek writers. Ready-made. Shatner's Ashes of Eden would have made a great Star Trek movie because there's nobody at the studio level that's going to be like, no, we're not going to go look at those books. Well, why not? I mean, they adapt lots of other books. Why not Star Trek books? Star Trek books are considered tools for marketing. They're not given the same... People that write Star Trek books, whether they're good or bad, they're like, I'm not going to do that. Why didn't somebody go and adapt the first Dark Horse Aliens versus Predator comic? That was awesome. Well, there's a prejudice against it. Well, why would I do that? If I was hired to go in and do a franchise, I would absolutely go out and go, let's adapt this book. Here it is. Here's the story. You want to tell a post Return of the Jedi Star Wars story? Well, you had 25 years of stories to look at and go, well, we should look into this. Dark Empire, the Thrawn trilogy, whatever. There's been a lot of great stuff already written, but no. I'm going to go do my own thing. Yeah, but was your own thing better? Was it? We need more of that. But I don't think, let's see. Where was I? What was your question, James? Matthew Garrett sends in a super chat and says, first time tuning in. I'ma stay. Thank you, Rob. Well, Matthew Garrett, thank you. Appreciate it. Anybody who wants to subscribe or do that. I appreciate that. Always good. And remember, if you want to write me letters, you can send them to me at the Burnettwork.net website. Alexander Wilson continues on and says, that move made Kenya Burris leave ABC Studios for Netflix. I did not know that. Bob Iger called him about political sensitivities. Where's the outrage for this censorship? What Disney lost is Netflix's gain. I hope that episode sees the light of day. I think it will. Regis K. Well, wait a minute. Let me finish that thought, Alexander. I'm sorry. I'm just stunned by this. Regis K. Hang on. I'll get to that. Alexander, I think if nothing else, one of the great things about what has happened is that, look, we're going to see, it's bad for me because I just get drummed out of the room because I'm a cis white male, older. I understand. I just have to weather that storm. But like I always said, the voices of the creators, the authorship of work of all kinds, it's not that people who have different skin color, it's not about the skin color. It's about the life experience that people have led because of that skin color that has given them a unique voice, a different perspective. And that's what's important. It's that perspective that we need to hear from. It's not, you don't just want to hire somebody to be somewhere because of the color of their skin. You want to hire them because they are bringing a perspective we haven't heard, that we need to hear, that we desperately need to hear. And I think that's going to be the great outcome of all of this. And that's we are going to hear the stories that we haven't heard because people are going to finally have the opportunities to tell their stories. And I think we're going to be all the richer for it. So yes, I think you're right. It is Netflix's gain. And you know what, Netflix, say what you want about Netflix. They're putting stuff out from all over the world. You want to see representation across the planet? Netflix, man. And people don't talk about that very much. There is some incredible programming from all the countries of the globe that are making material. It's pretty incredible. And yet, Netflix remains unsung because still a lot of Americans, well, they're not delving into their, here's an interesting series from India. I'll watch that. But Netflix is doing a pretty good job representing the human race across the planet. And that's pretty cool. Now, Regis K., what you just said, Apple released today the trailer for Foundation. It's coming in 2021. Now, for those of you who are going, what's that? One of the things that when I was in the 4th grade, and I was 10, and I joined the science fiction book club, my parents allowed me to join the science fiction book club, was one of the first things I read was the Foundation trilogy by Isaac Asimov. And the Foundation trilogy basically deals with the rise of galactic empires on a grand scale, the rise and fall, and introduced the character of Harry Seldon, who came up with the idea of psychohistory and how, anyway, it's very hard to explain all of it. Trantor, the city of Trantor. There's so many good things in it. Well, Apple has made, they've tried to do this for years, but they've turned the Foundation trilogy, and there's other Foundation books, into a series. I cannot wait for this. I'm going to jump off the show, and I'm going to go watch it because, oh my God. I can't believe that that they've done that, and I have to see this. I have to see it. I can't wait. That's very, very, very exciting. Okay, let's see. Casper Arrow sends in a tip. It says, hello, Rob. My all-time favorite director is Elia Kazan. I was just wondering, do you have a favorite Elia Kazan movie, and what do you think of him as an overall director and his work? I know he's very controversial. He is very controversial, but his influence is undeniable. Well, the first thing that jumps to my mind is A Streetcar Named Desire. But hold on, hang on. But I'll tell you. Let me look. Okay. Oh, he directed Panic in the Street. I love Panic in the Streets. And I have a 3-sheet right over there. A 3-sheet is a poster that's 81 inches by 81 inches for A Face in the Crowd. Which, by the way, if you guys want to watch a political thriller, I'd call it, starring Andy Griffith, by the way, A Face in the Crowd, I think that might be. I think A Face in the Crowd might be my favorite Elia Kazan movie. But hang on. Let me just go through this. Of course, he directed East of Eden. But yeah, East of Eden's great, but yeah, I think my favorites of his movies are... Oh, and of course, Gentleman's Agreement, everyone's favorite Oscar winner. Although I recently watched Gentleman's Agreement again, and it's pretty good too. I mean, it's a little didactic, but I think so. My favorites would be Streetcar Named Desire, On the Waterfront, and A Face in the Crowd. Probably A Face in the Crowd. But Elia Kazan is a pretty incredible director. And if I might recommend, everybody would like Panic in the Streets. Watch Panic in the Streets and Face in the Crowd as a double feature. That's a good one. Richard said, I'm not sure if you heard the hubbub over the release of Last of Us 2. Suffice to say, it's the politically charged sequel to its universally beloved predecessor. A same old story of recent years. That said, I was very intrigued at how it was going to... plotted story. Suffice to say, it has to be one of the worst plotted stories I've ever seen, populated with characters that are not actually characters. I'm so worried that the culture war, where left-leaning gaming websites giving the game 10 out of 10 and rebellious gamers furiously downvoting it, the actual negatives of the game are being overlooked. I'm wondering if the quality of the future works will degrade as our political war blinds criticism on both sides. Thoughts? Wow, that's an easy question to answer, Richard. Okay, for those of you, I have not played Last of Us 2. I played Last of Us once. Played Last of Us, the first one. I loved it. Again, I thought it was a huge leap forward for video game storytelling. I don't mean to equate it with Uncharted, but Uncharted was the first time I played a video game all the way through in one sitting. And the first Uncharted, I was pretty wrapped up in the characters and even the voice acting and everything. I loved it. But what I've heard about Last of Us 2, I've not played it. I mean, obviously, if anybody's been paying attention, a main character is dispatched fairly early on in the game in a shocking turn of events, and dispatched in a very... Gary Beekler, Nerdrotic, I watched he did a piece on it yesterday, which I thought was pretty good. Look, we're going to have to endure a lot of what I would call reactionary storytelling for a while. That in everybody's... I keep going back to Damon Lindelof when he was being interviewed for Watchmen, how he said when TV writers get together, they love to try and out-woke each other. Well, that's horrific. But we're going to have to deal with that for a while. And I think ultimately it comes back to sales. You know, if everyone's buying the game, if it sells well, that's the only way. That's the only indicator. And look at. I mean, Star Wars is a case in point. The fact that the movies that were made, if you look at merchandise, and whether you like them or not, there is a reality in terms of what sold and what didn't sell. And the same thing is happening to these other franchises. And if they are not connecting with their core audience, people are going to get hurt in the pocketbook. And that's the only way that anybody will know, and that's the only way that anybody... And we're seeing it. It just doesn't work. Ultimately, as I have said, you cannot put the Burnett axiom. The Burnett axiom has always been, you cannot put your universe before your characters and story. Just like you cannot put an agenda before your characters and story. If you do, you've corrupted the purity of your storytelling. All of those things should be baked into your story. They should be a part of it, yes. But all stories have points to make. And all stories address certain agendas and the way people are. But you know what? Stories also have to be true to themselves. And what's happening is, in trying to be good, or in trying to be open and trying to be inclusive and all this, the storytelling itself is being compromised. And it isn't good storytelling. And that's what's happening. And this good storytelling, people are seeing it. The core audiences, and it'll shake out. It's going to shake out because I think, like I've always said, I do not believe that art is subjective and that storytelling is subjective. I think that there is an inherent objectivity to art storytelling. Now, your opinions about storytelling are certainly, and art are absolutely subjective. But I think the great films, like, why is there an AFI list of the 100 greatest films? Because there is an objective goodness or greatness or excellentness to certain things. Whether you choose to recognize it or not, I think it's there. There's a reason why the Mona Lisa endures. There's a reason why Shakespeare's stories endure. Because the truths at the core of those stories. You watch Hamlet. Why has Hamlet been adapted, and why is Hamlet might be one of the most influential stories of all time? Why? Because there are inherent human truths inherent in those stories. And that's what storytelling is all about. You're dealing with human truth. And that human truth, how is it defined? It's defined by all of us the way we lead our lives. We know if stories are true or not. And the thing is, life is difficult. Life's multidimensional. And if you try and turn a story into something where you're just promoting an agenda, you've corrupted the story. And viewers and watchers and readers or whatever, we all know. Video gamers, if your story is if you put your agenda before your characters and story, it's apparent. So, I've seen the hubbub, but it's I think we're going to have to endure it for a while. But you know what? If these things don't work, if they're financially successful, well, then it worked. But if it's not as financially successful, then people are going to be scratching their heads going, what went wrong? Well, you did. You went wrong. Your storytelling went wrong. You capitulated to fashion. And right now, fashion, if you're trying to follow a trend, and the trend now is to see how can I make my stories more, call it whatever you want. Woke is the overall term. That's not how you tell a story. You have to tell a story that's true to itself. And if you're not doing that, then you've corrupted your own story and you will fail. Eric Gantz sends in a tip and says, just chiming in to say that I appreciate the work you do, Rob. Well, thank you. Your channel remains one of my favorites. Well, thank you for that, too. And kudos for so deftly handling those posts that some might consider trolling. You are a class act, sir. I appreciate that. I very much appreciate that. Look, people who troll or have politically everybody's points of view, I believe that everybody should be listened to. And everybody's ideas are valid and worth discussing in a proper venue. And I hope that this is the venue to do that. What I've tried to build here with Robservations and what I've tried to do is offer a place where all fans, all imagination connoisseurs, all members of the Post-Geek Singularity, can come and share their thoughts. The only thing I ask is that everybody else respects the community. You are here as part of a community. If you respect the community and you present your ideas in a cogent way that we can discuss it, well, then great. I'm willing to discuss it. So please do. Please come on in. Richard, I keep coming back to what you were saying. I hope that cooler heads will prevail. Will N is here. Will N says, "Hi, Mr. B. First time tipping on YouTube ever." Well, thank you, Will. I appreciate that. Thanks for supporting the channel. Congrats. Love your unique perspective on all things entertainment. I must say I gained so much enjoyment from your letters. Never seen anybody else willing to read complete essays from viewers. I'm now hooked. Thanks. Well, Will, I got to tell you, one of the great things about this channel is the audience. I love people's essays, and what I really love about reading people's work is it's kind of self-policing, because you read the kind of discourse. You guys are smart motherfuckers. I mean, you really are. And one of the great things I love about conversing and having people's letters come in is that the level of discourse has been kept so high. That isn't me. That's you guys. I just threw a party, and you guys have shown up. And guys, girls, gentle beings, kind souls, however you are from the 28 known galaxies, it is great to have the audience that I have. And it's fantastic. And the letters that you guys write, and everybody writes, it really sets the tone. So thank you for that. Eric Gantz sends in a tip and says, Glenn Mazzara completed the pilot for a Dark Tower series at Amazon last year, and it seemed to be very faithful to the books, specifically Wizard and Glass. Sadly, it never aired. After spending who knows how much on the thing, why shelve it? Thoughts? Well, Eric, you'd be surprised. With the network shows, they would commission, say, 20 pilots, and only 10 would be able to go to series. And that's all a loss leader for them. They spend the money, they find something good, they hope it goes. Apparently, it wasn't what they wanted. And, it's hard to make great entertainment. And they look at it, and they look at they shot the sequel, or the sequel series to Game of Thrones. And they shot it. Shelved it. Didn't like it. So, yeah. So, Stubble McShave sends in a tip and says, me and a friend watched Batman and Robin in theaters. Afterwards, we were deflated. When we got home, we made excuses for it and convinced ourselves that it was pretty good. We went back the next weekend to watch it again and can confirm that it was utter garbage. Yeah, I can't go with you. I hated it. Batman and Robin was it was too silly. He capitulated to there were too many cooks. Yeah, it was not good. Not good at all. Very disappointing. Alexander Wilson says the highest grossing Chinese movie in the USA is Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon with 128 million in 2000. The highest grossing Indian movie in USA was Babwali 2, The Conclusion, with 21 million in 2017. I know. How do you get Americans to be interested in foreign film? Hopefully places like Netflix. A lot of people just don't want to read subtitles. I get it. But one of the problems that the United States has, and I criticize, I say this about all of us, is I've heard somewhere that 65% of Americans don't have passports. I think another thing, we should have all kinds of travel programs for our students. People need to travel the world, because one of the quickest ways to combat things like racism, travel, man. I cannot stress that enough. Traveling around the world, and people say, oh, Rob, that's a luxury. I'm like, save up your money. It isn't a luxury. It's what we should be doing. The rest of the world, like if you live in Europe, you can get on a train for not a whole lot of money, and in a couple hours be in a land that speaks a totally different language, that has totally different history and totally different customs. We don't have that. We've got people in American cities that never left their city. And I think that part of having a really well-educated and very healthy population is that people will travel. And the more they learn about other cultures around the world, what is America? We have all of these people, all of these immigrants coming from around the world to be in America. But all of those immigrants come from cultures that you can watch movies that those cultures make. Whether it's, We Are the Flesh. Now, don't shoot the messenger, but if you watch like a Mexican movie like We Are the Flesh, which is crazy and sexy and awesome, there's three of our greatest film directors are from Mexico. And you think to yourself, well, how vibrant is the Mexican film industry? I don't know. Have you looked into it before? We certainly got three of our best directors now, and yet we have a president that says, let's build a wall. Are you kidding? Mexican culture is amazing. Why aren't we sharing it? Why aren't we? By the way, We Are the Flesh. If you're young, if you watch it, make sure your mom's not home, and don't blame me. But it is available on Blu-ray from Arrow. Just saying. So I just want to say that we've got a great planet full of wonderful, interesting, cool people all over the place, and let's go find them. Like, go watch movies, go see movies from all over the place. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff out there. And by the way, there are science fiction movies and horror movies from all of these places too. But you're right, Alexander. It's a tough nut. How do you get Americans to watch these things? I don't know, but we should. Claudius Seinfeld is here. Hello, Claudius. Hashtag physical media. What is this obsession people have with books? They put them in their houses like they're trophies. What do you need for... Oh, yeah, Jerry Seinfeld. Okay. What do you need for it after you read it? Jerry Seinfeld to George Costanza. Yeah, well, I know. I judge people. Whenever I go into people's houses, I flat out judge them by the books they have in the physical media. I judge them. I'm like, Or if they don't have books, I used to judge my grandparents. I'm like, you guys have like 10 books here, and you read them like 40 years ago. Come on. Anyway. But yeah, I do. But look, you know what? I like these things because when I look at my bookshelves, I remember when I read them. I remember what's happening to me. And by the way, another plug. I'm telling you, I'm not being paid. Lawrence Wright's the end of October. If you want to read a breezy airport read about a pandemic that's sweeping the planet, it's great. So thank you for that, Claudius. Hitchcock is the GOAT is here. Sends in a tip and says, I know, never bet against James Cameron, but absolutely no excuse for The Abyss or True Lies not to be available. I know, man. Multiple versions of The Terminator, Avatar, Titanic. Missed opportunity in 2019 for the 30th anniversary. He might be busy, but the studio can distribute it for him. I do not understand why Lightstorm, it's 4 movies. It's not just True Lies and The Abyss. It's also Soderbergh's, and the Soderberghs who directed it and Cameron produced, remake of Solaris. Where's that? And Catherine Bigelow's Strange Days. Another Lightstorm film. I have the German Blu-ray. Where is it? I don't know. Roberto Suarez is here. Breaking Foundation series trailer has dropped. Dude, I'm dying. I am dying. I'm dying to read it, watch this trailer. It's killing me that why haven't I seen it? I don't know. People keep saying. Zach Losel says, I told my mom about the drive-in that's open near us, and she told me about her experience taking acid while watching Dirty Harry at a drive-in. She said it was definitely not the best idea. Kudos to your mom. You know what's so great now is that a lot of us have parents. I mean, my parents, I'm a little older, so not true, but you youngins, you've got parents that got up to all kinds of shenanigans. And I'm a firm believer in going to your folks and asking about, like, hey, Mom, when was the first time you dropped acid? Or, hey, Mom, when was the first time you did, whatever. And I love it when you have parents that'll tell you those things. Because, yeah, I think that would be actually funny. I would love to do a whole story. Like, here's a task for all of you imagination connoisseurs. Go out and talk to your parents and get their most maybe intimate or interesting drive-in stories. And see what you can find out. Send me letters about drive-in stories. I'll do an entire episode about people's parents and their drive-in stories, or your drive-in stories if you want. I think that's a great idea. Honest Asian Guy sends in a tip and says, hey, Rob, one of my favorite new studios is A24. They've been killing it for the last 10 years. Some of my favorites from them are Ex Machina, American Honey, The Witch, The Disaster Artist, and Oasis, Supersonic. What are your thoughts on A24 as a studio, and do you own The Room on Blu-ray? I love A24. I mean, they also put out Hereditary and Midsommar. I think A24 is one of the most exciting studios out. They have, whoever's choosing movies there, they have pretty impeccable taste. The Witch and Ex Machina are definitely 2 of my favorites. And if you go and you look at their, well, hang on. Allow me. Let's see, because their list of films is quite, as Darth Vader said, impressive. Most impressive. Let's see if I got this list here. I mean, let's go to their movies. Wait, these are just TV shows. Filmography, list of A24 films. Here's movies that have come out from A24. Spring Breakers, The Bling Ring, The Spectacular Now, Enemy, Under the Skin, Locke, The Rover, Tusk, Laggies, A Most Violent Year, Ex Machina, The End of the Tour, Dark Places, Mississippi Grind, Room, The Witch, Green Room, The Lobster, Swiss Army Man, Man, this is American Honey, Sea of Trees, Moonlight, Oasis Supersonic, The Monster, 20th Century Woman, The Black Coat's Daughter, The Lovers, A Ghost Story, Good Time, The Florida Project, The Killing of a Sacred Deer. I mean, this is just, it's amazing. First Reformed, which I love, of course, Hereditary, Eighth Grade, A Prayer Before Dawn. Wow, they've done a lot of great stuff. I mean, they're an incredible studio. So I'm right there with you, Honest Asian Guy. Aram sends in a super chat and says, art, objective, can't be a shots fired. I know, man, I know. John and I have been going back and forth. Because John always says, well, how can you measure that? Like, how can you measure whether objectivity or subjectivity? And I'm like, I'll bet you could. We just don't have those tools yet. We haven't applied. I mean, I'm sure when we have deep learning AI and can map cognition and things, we will figure that out. But Jason Bueno says, I beat The Last of Us 2. It was a gut punch, but it was incredible, in my opinion. Full of nuance, powerful, thought-provoking messages, character, and service of the story. I've heard that too. You know, I've heard that the story, once you get past certain elements of it, the story's actually been incredible. John Campia did a video about how he watched the cutscenes or whatever and thought they were great. They were great. Richard sends in a tip and says, think someone sent in a tip between my 3 tips. His tip ends in class act. Oh, wait, but I thought I read that, didn't I? Yeah, Eric Gant. I read that. But thanks for pointing that out. I appreciate that. Thank you for that, Richard and Jason. Dan V is here. Hello, Dan V. Well, I'm about to restart your show from the beginning, but I never expected Keaton to be in talks to be an older Bruce in this way. I always hoped for him to play an older Bruce Wayne in a Batman Beyond film. It is very exciting news. It's very exciting news, and I hope it happens. I really do. Dan V goes on to say, I will gladly die on the hill that Batman Forever is better than Batman Returns, though. Other than the ball scene, I find Returns to be pretty terrible, where it's not really a Batman movie, and Keaton played a one-dimensional character compared to 89. Well, the one-dimensionality of Keaton, I will say, is a valid criticism, very much so. But I like Batman Returns. I think it's the most Tim Burton movie. I mean, I love it. I do. I love it. Batman Forever, it's too campy for me. And again, the villains are just so, it's tough. It's tough. It's hard for me. But I do like Val Kilmer's Batman. And of course, my love of redheads is on record. And Nicole Kidman looks pretty damn delicious in that whole movie. Richard says, have you ever daydreamed about an alt Star Trek sequel series instead of Discovery and not Picard? Oh, pretty much every other night. I, for one, think Ira Steven Behr's DS9 Season 8 plot pilot. Not saying it knocked it out of the park or anything, but the idea that the Bajorans become the founders of the Dominion is a really cool idea. Always thought their implied fate was kind of lame, demilitarized, I guess, or simply resurging would be lame as well. The idea of the oppressed people taking over a religiously fertile empire is cool. Love that idea. I thought it would have been great. I still think DS9 is the best modern Star Trek. I always have. I thought it was great. And I think that the 6th season of Deep Space Nine is the most consistent season of modern Star Trek. Alexander Wilson goes on and says, I grew up with my black grandmother who was born in 27. She didn't push travel into my mom and her siblings because it was dangerous to travel in the USA for black people. Absolutely. She grew up in South Carolina, and they weren't allowed to go to the beach. You hear that, and it's just terrible. And don't forget about the infamous sundown towns where it was fatal to stay after the sun went down for black people. This helped put the fear in people to travel because they were scared that they may not make it home. That's the system at work. Well, as Alexander points out, yes, I mean, this country, just because we freed the slaves, to this day, black Americans have never been equal. And we have this thing in fits and starts where, for a while, maybe this will be the beginning of true reform. And black Americans might finally be on the way to living in a safe and just system. Because it's never, ever happened. And Alexander, that's a very good point to make. I will say this. There are lots of places in the world, though, that people can travel to. And they might enjoy it. I'll tell you a funny story. When I was working on Lord of the Rings, there was a lot of American VFX artists that were working at Weta Digital, and I met one black guy who they're just there's in New Zealand. There's the Maori that are the South Sea Islanders, and they're sort of New Zealand's oppressed minorities. And they made some interesting movies about Maori culture. Utu is one that I suggest watching, and especially a movie called Lee Tamahori's Once Were Warriors. But it was interesting because he was saying to me, he's like, there aren't any black people in New Zealand, so everybody thinks I'm cool. They love me here. And he's like, as a black man, if I'd known that I'd get this kind of a reaction in New Zealand, I would have come down here a long time ago. And I thought that was very strange and very funny and kind of delightful. And it really, again, it depends where you are standing on the planet Earth. But America, hopefully it will get better. Hopefully it will get better, Alexander. But your grandmother was not wrong. Mukbang sends in a super chat and says, general support. Your shows are still the best. Well, Mukbang, I want to thank you for that. I appreciate your ongoing support of the channel. It's always good to have you here. And that is great. Dan V sends in a tip and says, I don't know if it will make waves tomorrow, but Batman 93 has a very tone-deaf cover with a bloody Joker in a theater. After the Dark Knight Rises shooting, even if it was 8 years ago, I'm dumbfounded that the cover made it through editorial. Yeah, look, we have a short-term memory in this country, unfortunately. Claudius is back. Bonjour, Robert. My parents met in Dr. No's Kingston, Jamaica. They married in 1960. Wow. So, yes, it's their 60th wedding anniversary. My father was born... oh, man, how am I going to say this? Okay, my father was born near Oracabesa in Ian Fleming's home in Jamaica. By the way, Skyfall is still awesome. It's awesome. Oh, that's pretty cool. I hope your parents are still around. They created a fine son in you, sir. Have you been? I'm sure you've been to Jamaica. Yeah. So that is very cool. And please wish your parents a very happy anniversary. How cool is it to be from Kingston, Jamaica? I mean, that would be great. How did they meet? Like, did people go to dances? What was it like? What was it like dating in Kingston, Jamaica 60 years ago? Like, was there courtship? Did you have to, like, ask someone's father to take their daughter out? Was it that kind of thing? I want to believe. I mean, it was only the 60s, and if you look at The Godfather, like in Italy, Michael Corleone had to ask Apollonia's father, and under the supervision of their family, to go out with Apollonia. So what was that like? I'd be curious. What was going down in Kingston? What was dating like in 1960 in Kingston, Jamaica? And what was it like? What was it like for your folks? Were they still in Kingston, Jamaica when Dr. No came out? Like, what was that like? That'd be cool to hear about. Mukbang says, did you catch up on the Gallery Mandalorian episodes, RE music score props? I have not. I've been remiss. Enthralling episodes, and they put so much thought into every frame. I know. I gotta catch up. I need to catch up. What the hell? Senor Ashish says the Wrap is now reporting Flash creates an alternate universe that delves into what Keaton's Batman has been up to since Batman Returns, negating Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, as well as Batfleck. Keaton Man will be the DCEU Batman. Battinson is said to be in its own universe, like Joker. I love that. By the way, can I just say, I think I stole my graphic, my thumbnail from the Wrap. I think I did. I think I totally stole it from the Wrap. I mean, I was like, oh, I've got something to talk about now. Richard sends in a tip and says, great show. Well, thank you for that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I got some more letters. I'm going to delve into the letters. Actually, I have a lot of letters today, and I'm not going to be able to catch up with all of them, so I'm going to push these letters to tomorrow. So if you wrote me a letter, as promised, though, I've got a Willow Yang letter. And for those new watchers of the show, Willow Yang is one of our, I guess we'd call her, she's our resident PhD microbiologist. And she's delightful, she's smart, she's cute, she has when you hear her voice, she's cute as a button, by the way. And she's also brilliant and a terrific writer and Chinese, and she's an immigrant from Canada. She wrote this letter, and I'm going to read it to you. She also has her own page on the website called Willow Talk, because along with Vesna and Paula, she's got a very dirty mind. And that's all of those things are everything that we encourage here on Robservations, the show about something. Greetings, Rob. I'm writing my discussion on the Next Generation episode, Genesis. Directed by Gates McFadden. Right off the top, I will say that I did not think Genesis was a good episode at all. However, because it featured introns, I could not resist writing about it. What are introns? Well, eukaryotic genes, eukaryotic being one of the three major domains of life that encompasses most multicellular organisms, including us, are usually structured so that you have a sequence of DNA that contains segments known as exons and segments known as introns. When you are using a gene to create a protein, the DNA is first transcribed into a copy of RNA. However, before the instructions in the RNA can be utilized to generate a protein, it has to be processed first so that all of the intron segments are removed and only the exons remain, a process known as splicing. A special complex consisting of various nucleic acids and proteins, known as a spliceosome, is responsible for finding special regions along the RNA to make excisions. I won't go into detail about how all of that works, other than to say that it's imperative that the removal of introns is done correctly. Otherwise, you will end up with the wrong set of instructions for the protein, and that's not good. Now, it is true that some introns do contain the vestiges of ancient genes we've stopped using. However, the vast majority of these genes have degenerated and are no longer functional due to the abundance of mutations that they've accumulated over millions of years of evolution. The answer of what will happen if you activate your introns is quite simple. You will synthesize a bunch of the wrong proteins, resulting in death. You will certainly not transform into some prehistoric animal. And how exactly can a synthetic T-cell mutate into a so-called intron virus that can apparently infect every race of aliens and animals as well? Let's just say that Barkley should be immediately locked away in a biosafety level 4 lab, or whatever the 24th century equivalent of that is, because he's a dangerous reservoir that appears to defy everything we know about evolution and virology. Who knows what other types of diseases can emerge from him? The scientific inaccuracies of Genesis aside, what exactly did the crew of the Enterprise do after they realized that there's a virus spreading around? Seemingly, not much. There's just the scene of an infected Riker trying unsuccessfully to send a message to Starfleet. Cut away to a few days later, and you have Picard returning to find his entire crew had either died or turned into animal-human hybrids. I think Picard facepalm memes should come in handy right now. I have gripes with this because I do feel sometimes that there's a conflict between Starfleet officers supposedly being the best of the best and being able to find solutions to the impossible, and yet, at the same time, there still being instances where they come across as gullible and incompetent. The most pressing example in my memory is the episode The Game, where the entire ship gets mind-controlled from playing a game that Riker brought back from Risa. As an aside, who'd have thought that the only infectious thing Riker would pick up from Risa would be a game? And now, well... And the only two people on board that had any suspicions were, surprise, surprise, Wesley and his love interest, Ashley Judd. That's right, Ashley Judd. Wesley hadn't fortuitously been on the Enterprise. They'd have been conquered because there wasn't one other person on the ship who'd noticed that there was something strange afoot. The same thing happened here with Genesis, where, had it not been for Picard and Data returning back to the Enterprise in the nick of time, the entire crew would have perished. We're going through the coronavirus pandemic right now, and we've had stories of cruise ships like the Diamond Princess and the MZ Zandam suffering from outbreaks. Even though it took weeks for the people on board to get the ships evacuated, and many of them did get infected, the vast majority were still able to get off unscathed. Of course, I acknowledge that this totally fictitious Barkley virus causes a loss in cognitive functions, making it more difficult to deal with. But I still think that a highly technologically advanced 24th century spaceship carrying a crew of extremely intelligent and trained individuals would have better protocols on dealing with outbreaks. At the very least, it should have appeared as if the crew had tried enacting some quarantine or other preventative measures after Ogawa had warned the senior staff about the infectious disease that's spreading. But they seem to have just carried on, business as usual, until everyone was incapacitated. I know that I've been bashing Genesis, but the fact is, I didn't hate the episode. In spite of the absurd science, Riker's disastrous command, and the goddamn Worf Troy ship, that came out of nowhere and made no sense in my opinion, I still found it to be a relatively enjoyable episode. For me, it's kind of like a short, campy B-horror movie, and at the very least, it succeeded in keeping me entertained. My only wish is that I could have seen Picard transform into a lemur, because why not? Live long and prosper, Willow. Well, Willow, once again, thank you for another delightful letter, and that truly was a delightful letter. I very much appreciated that, because you are correct. Let's see. What more letters do I have? I have many, but I have to get off soon. I have to end this show soon, so I cannot. There was one I promised I would read, and I don't have it. I can't find it. I can't find it right now. Ah, here it is. This letter comes from Kurt A. Hi, Rob, and the Post-Geek Singularity. I left your 447th show early, but I listened to the full show the next day. When I got to the part where you read a statement from Wizards of the Coast concerning D&D's portrayal of orcs, drow, and possibly other non-human races, I laugh out loud. Why did I laugh? Well, I left your show to join my friends in playing an online version of a D&D campaign. And in that adventure, the party tracked down a warband of marauding orcs and wiped them out. To be fair, a younger member of our group suggested we talk to the orcs first, but when it was pointed out that this warband had decimated a village a few days ago, killing everyone, we decided to just attack them. Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas would have been proud of us. Now, a bit of history regarding D&D. Gary Gygax and Dave Arnson created Dungeons & Dragons in the early 70s. Anyone who has read Tolkien and played D&D knows the game lifted a lot of things from Professor Tolkien's Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, and Silmarillion novels. Among the numerous things taken were hobbits, in D&D renamed halflings, ents, renamed in D&D as treants, and orcs, who, ironically, were not renamed. The origin of orcs is stated in the Silmarillion. They were created by the first Dark Lord, Morgoth, before the First Age, and served him and later his successor in their quest to dominate Middle-earth. Before Orome first found the elves at Cuvenian, Melkor kidnapped some of them and cruelly tortured them, twisting them into the first orcs. The orcs in D&D, just like the orcs from Lord of the Rings, from which they were based upon, were evil. Hell, their alignment was chaotic evil. Now, I suppose you can retcon anything you want. Hell, it's been done all the time. But originally, orcs were an unnatural creation, made to serve an evil god who cared only about conquest. There were no good orcs. Man-flesh, anyone? Oh, one more thing. In another D&D campaign by one of my oldest friends, I play a half-orc. He's lewd, crude, brutish, and a hell of a lot of fun to play. But he's also got a heart of gold and has already faced death several times to save his human, halfling, and elf companions. And one last thing, this time concerning the drow. There is the famous character of Drizzt Do'Urden, a dark elf who forsakes his people's evil ways and becomes a hero. But I guess that's a letter for another day. As always, stay awesome and live long and prosper. That comes from Bronze Age Slacker Kurt A. Well, thank you. I appreciate that, Kurt. That is most excellent, and I appreciate you writing in. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I have to actually go do a panel. I have to record a Comic-Con panel for the San Diego Comic-Con's virtual Comic-Con. I'm going to record that with an old boss of mine, actually. So I will, let's see, a Senior Ashish sends in, oh, I already read that one. Richard said, great show. Gerald sends in a tip and says, great show, Rob, but we all know that it's just an appetizer for the main course. Elizaviews, whining about movies. See you there. For those of you who don't know, for any new viewers, we have a sister show, a companion show I do with my girlfriend, Elizabeth Gwendolyn Bell. She is, of course, the ace, the arbiter of cinematic excellence, and, of course, she is also the enchantress of, well, she's the enchantress of many things, but the enchantress of cinematic excellence as well. Or the enchantress of, I don't even remember. She'll tell you tonight. But our show, Elizabeth's Whining About Movies, is we have Sci-Fi Week happening this week. And tonight, we are watching Steven Spielberg's interpretation of what was once a Stanley Kubrick film, AI, Artificial Intelligence, tonight at 7, followed by, that's right, followed by, on Wednesday, we're watching Alex Garland's Ex Machina, and in a change which Dieter Bastian from Germany is not going to like, we were going to watch Passengers on Friday, but Elizabeth requested that we change and we watch Mark Romanik's devastating Never Let Me Go. So that is Sci-Fi Week on Elizaviews tonight, 7 o'clock. Tune in. Elizabeth and I share a bottle of wine, and we will talk about Steven Spielberg's 2001 release. Gosh, I can't believe it's 19 years old. AI. So join us. Now, ladies and gentlemen, kind sirs, gentle beings from across the 28 known galaxies, let me just fetishistically get one more thing. Here it is, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, hoisting it above my head. My Hot Toys, of course, 6th scale Batmobile. I mean, how cool is this? Come on, man. It's one of the coolest toys ever made. Of course, from Tim Burton's 1989 Batman and Batman Returns. Very exciting. Let me put this down. It's very heavy. That is a very, very heavy toy. I don't know how practical it is to play with, but I bring an end to Robservations episode number 449. I want to thank everybody, all the new watchers. Please like, please subscribe. Thank you for all the support on the channel, whether you're sending me letters or you're supporting me via super chats or tips. Thank you very, very much. Of course, I will be back tomorrow and every day at 1 o'clock. I am not on the John Campy show. He is on hiatus for the next couple weeks. But you can find me here discussing topics of the day. If you'd like to write me letters or you want to send me videos, which I do play on the show, you can do that at the Burnettwork.net website. Hopefully we're way behind, but all the letters that I read here are also on there. They haven't been over the last couple months, but we're going to be getting them up and all of that. So remember, people, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And join us tonight on Whining About Movies, about Steven Spielberg's 2001 sci-fi opus that was developed originally by Stanley Kubrick, AI, Artificial Intelligence, and which is actually a riff on Pinocchio. So, see you tonight, I hope. And with that, I say to all of you, have a better day.